Finish yourself, sir?
Okay.
Okay, comrades, so this is the third of our learning play events, and it follows on from what we've had. We've been looking at Bertolt Brecht particularly, but raising him in connection with Walter Benjamin quite a bit so far, but we go further into Benjamin this evening, and particularly around his Angel of History, which is up there. You can possibly see it more full size, yeah. Which was a painting that he bought. It was by Paul Klee, and he bought it in 1921, and it obviously had a huge effect on him, and he wrote about it quite a bit. We're exploring some of that, and other angelic sort of presences that that seem to fit in. And again, we're looking at seeding something that will hopefully grow into a full performance with Angel's Wings, possibly as well, as you shall see shortly. It also ties in a lot with, well, the other angelic presences. I should just say William Blake's poem, The Angel, and the angel figure that I played in a play called In Satire of the Three Estates, which we did the first performance of it since its inception, which was in 1553, I think, and the first time it was ever performed again in its entirety was when we did it over 500 years later. It's an extraordinary piece of work. And I played a character called Divine Correction, an avenging angel. And also there's some songs from an album called St. Jack by, again, I must confess, friends of mine, a band called Nectarine Number 9. The song in particular that we're looking at, St. Jack, and I'm putting together with William Blake's The Angel. We've got some music to play around with as well. But the second track on that album is called Curdled Fragments, an instrumental, and that just fitted again so perfectly, as so much is, with the sort of one of the big thrusts of what we're doing, that fragments. This is a quote about what Brecht felt about them from a little book of an exhibition that was on in Raven Row in the East End of London, and this is called Fragments. And this says, Brecht believed that the complexities of modernity and the phenomenon of global capitalism could no longer be contained in the neatly bounded stories of naturalism or figurative representation. They required a far more fractured approach that grasped in fragments and snapshots for the more hidden causalities and relations shaping social reality. And Esther is going to begin with.
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to begin not with Benjamin, but alongside Benjamin, with Kurt Schwitters, who's the great collector of rubbish, urban detritus from the streets, and he puts it together to make these extraordinary pictures out of the fragments of thrown away everyday life. But he also wrote stories, very strange stories, partly from his imprisonment in Norway during the Second World War, and he rewrote fairy tales and so on. But there's one story I just want to begin with, is about angels, and it's a story in which called What is Happiness? And he's talking about angels and aeroplanes because both of those have wings. So What is Happiness is a story of angels who promenade in heaven. And he says they're like little white aeroplanes darting between flowers. Their only aim is happiness. And one day a hopeful angel descends to discover if there is happiness on earth. But the hopeful angel finds a world war, mass graves, burning hospitals, destroyed churches, thousands of corpses, tanks on their way to destroy more bodies, and soldiers who the angel realizes are slaves to the idea of a fatherland. He throws down flowers on these benighted people. The only happiness he perceives is when the wounded soldiers are happy to greet death and exit from this human-made hell. Aeroplanes appear to the angel as motorized angels, but here they are chucking firebombs, and then they start to open fire on the angel. The angel tries to march with the soldiers, but lacks their regimented pace and their disciplined self-negation. He lifts himself above the ranks only to have the commanding officers shout at him. That sets off a chain of abusive reaction, resulting in all the soldiers being punished. The angel concludes happiness is certainly not to be found here. And I thought it was interesting, the angel and the aeroplane, the paradisiacal, can we have heaven on earth? And then the reality of war and brutality that produces this pile of rubble out of the earth. And the pile of rubble is going to return and be part of how Benjamin reads this picture or takes this picture into his imaginative world. Soldiers and angels, two opposite principles, somewhat like the idea of commerce, which Schwitters rips in half to get this word März out of it. He finds a bit of rubbish from a commercial bank and he rips off part of it and just has the März part, and that becomes the name for his art. So he's producing sort of something directed towards creation, the non-monetized out of the heart of capitalism. And this might lead us also back to think about some of the things in our session around automation, sort of, machines that alleviate drudgery and those that reinforce it. So I think that's part of the parameter of the angels we want to evoke, and we're going to assemble some here today and think about how they might relate to critique and reconstruction, also sometimes maybe to naivety or piety. And we're taking our lead from Walter Benjamin's Angel of History, which is a version of Paul Klett's watercolour Angelus Novus. Do you think we should read the Angelus Novus section, maybe over music?
Yes, exactly. You got to go for it?
Or you read the Angelus.
Right. You've got that to hand. I know it's in the paper.
I got it. Can you read it here? There we go. It begins with a little poem by Shulman, who will come back.
My way is ready for flight. I would like to turn back. If I stayed timeless time, I would have little luck. A clay painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he is about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring. His mouth is open. His wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past. When we perceive the chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe which keeps idle rage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been snatched. But a storm is blowing in from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such a violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress.
Progress. I think we'll come back to progress because that is tied up very tightly with all the themes in this longer piece that Benjamin writes around 1940, probably early 1940. He composes a set of theses, and theses are a very strong form of writing because theses are writing kind of on the flip point to action. It's not just writing, it's writing directed to bridge analysis into activity. But writing in early 1940 is writing into a pretty desperate world, and Benjamin is about to go on the run, like make his final effort to exit Europe, having just spent some time in a prisoner of war camp, or what do you call it, an internment camp in France. So he's released from that camp. He comes back to Paris, where he's been living for a while, and he writes these pieces which are called On the Concept of History. And in these series of vignettes and dense pictures, he tries to analyze how have we got to this point where most of Europe has fallen to fascism and Nazism, where World War has broken out, and a catastrophe which had already been in motion, a catastrophe called capitalism, or it sometimes calls it a dream sleep that had fallen on Europe. That catastrophe is ramping up to a new phase. So the piece that Tam just read is perhaps the most famous thesis within this set of, well, 13 pieces with a couple of extra ones that weren't included when it was first published. And as you heard, or as you surmised, it's a reflection on this watercolor by Paul Klee, which had been in Benjamin's life since 1921 when he bought it in Munich. Its recent studies have shown that it is itself a montage, that Klee just stuck some paper on top of a ripped out image of Martin Luther from a 19th century illustrated book, which sets me off on a whole other set of thoughts. Martin Luther versus Thomas Müntzer. And very recently, the press Rabrad in Helsinki have issued this play by Berta Lask, which was written in 1931. She was a communist, fascinating play about the reactionariness of Martin Luther versus the revolutionary, sort of evangelism or angelicism of Thomas Müntzer in relation to the peasants' revolt in Germany. So another example of workers' theatre. But anyway, Luther is obscured by this new angel. And Benjamin would keep it above his desk wherever he lived. He wanted to found a journal with Brecht back in the 20s, which was to be named after this Angelus Novus, and it was going to be a journal of excellent political, aesthetic, literary critique, but they didn't manage to get the resources. They didn't do it as one of Benjamin's various failed projects. Benjamin loved play. He loved the kind of childlikeness of the aesthetic, but what he particularly loved was the way in which he saw it as between drawing and writing, the graphic line he saw as a sort of accessing a kind of third space between the drawn and the written, which he found interesting. Now we can look at this image and see something quite cute or something quite innocent. We might not read into it what Benjamin read into it in 1940, but he's looking at it against this backdrop of deportations, World War, the Hitler-Stalin Pact, which destabilized him intensely. So, you know, we never look innocently, we look within context, and that context then for Benjamin meant that he sees an angel who is admonishing, or you know, who is looking back at history, which has led to this catastrophe of events, rubble piling upon rubble. The angel would like to put things back together again, but there's no ability to stop and to mend things, because there is an idea that all that is happening is progressive. This is just history. You know, maybe this is him thinking of that third period idea after Hitler Us, or maybe it's him just thinking about capitalist technological development that the Social Democrats had said would push us through to abundance for all and jam tomorrow. We've just got to try to hold on there. He speaks in the thesis about the illusion that the German working class have been misled by social democracy to believe they're swimming with the stream, and as long as they don't revolt or mobilize the energies of hate and revenge, then they will reach the promised land. It's just a matter of endurance. And he said this is the result of that. The angel, that paradisiacal or that moment of happiness and fulfillment will not come, because our very sense of how it will come into being, this progressive development, this automatic development in history, is a myth, is a lie. We have to, he says in one of the theses, pull the emergency handbrake, stop, not move forward, stop, look back, and start to reconstruct. Of course, you know, this is all metaphorical and elliptical in many ways, and what Benjamin's trying to do with the theses is not give an analysis of history as such, but give an analysis of how we think about history. What is our concept of history that means we were able to think that what has happened in Europe is just inevitable or normalized or natural in some way, and what concept of history would we need which would enable us to break with this, start again, and rewrite history, I suppose, or make a new history. Maybe we should, would you like to read another thesis to give
I should say, by the way, that the CPGB are very big on theses. Yes. They love a good thesis. Shall I do which one, then that one that ties in with it, number 8? What do you think?
Yeah, let's have a look. Number 5. Yeah, number 8 is good.
I'm going to do it with music again.
The tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the emergency situation in which we live is the rule. We must arrive at a concept of history which corresponds to this. Then it will become clear that the task before us is the introduction of a real state of emergency. And our position in the struggle against fascism will thereby improve. Not the least reason that the latter has a chance is that its opponents, in the name of progress, treat it as a historical norm. The astonishment that the things we are experiencing in the 20th century are still possible is by no means philosophical. It is not the beginning of knowledge, unless it would be the knowledge that the conception of history on which it rests is untenable.
I find that thesis very interesting because it's both sort of arguing that you know, we have a sense of history that sees everything that happens become sort of retrospectively justified. That was the only way it could happen. Therefore, this is what we call progress. But at the same time, there's this notion of the amazement that the things we are experiencing are still possible. You know, Benjamin says this isn't a philosophical position. The only way you can stand in relation to that is to say that it's a concept of history that's wrong. So it's a question of, you know, the way in which we understand history rather than a question of our philosophy in a sense, and that's what he wants to change. And it was interesting to me that it was precisely that thesis that led someone in California to get in touch with me. He wanted to think about that thesis in relation to the coming of Trump to power, because what echoed for him was this all these people around him saying, how is this possible that Trump can come to power? And his response was, well, you weren't paying attention. If you didn't see the groundwork for all of this is already laid in the other regimes, in Biden and everything that went before, then you don't understand, you haven't been paying attention. And he wanted to bring this thesis sort of back into the present and again produce this fundamental critique of how we stand vis-a-vis history and how you can fracture it and find counter histories and rub it against the grain and open up these moments and possibilities that were closed down because everyone else is just going along with the standard position that this is how things are and this is how they must be. So it seems like there's some kind of political potential still perhaps in thinking about how we think about it. But other parts of the thesis in some ways are more concrete as well. And Benjamin is addressing Marx and thinking about his own relationship to Marx. And this is after a lifetime of being pulled in different directions, being pulled between Brecht, who he quotes in the thesis. He starts one of the theses with a line from the Threepenny Opera: "Consider the darkness and the great cold in this veil which resounds with mystery." And he uses that to head up a thesis which is very much expressing the idea that history is written by the victors. And not only is it written by the victors, but the demand in the history books is constantly for a kind of empathy with kings and empathy with those who won, and an identification with them, and a despising or ignoring of those over whose bodies the triumphal procession progresses. So he has Brecht as orienting point, but the first section that Tam read begins with a poem by Gershom Scholem, who's another point of attraction for Benjamin. And Scholem and Benjamin, right back in 1918, 1919, became interested. They were torn between kind of anarchist interests and Rosa Luxemburg, and both of their brothers, Werner Scholem and Georg Benjamin, went into the Communist Party. Georg Benjamin was killed, tried to escape from a concentration camp. He was electrocuted by the wires. I think Werner Scholem also suffered, I don't recall now. So they had this proximity around the time of the German Revolution to these ideas, and were subscribing to the revolutionary press and so on. But Scholem takes another path and becomes increasingly interested in Judaism and Kabbalah, and tries to tempt Benjamin that way. Scholem goes to Palestine, tries to get Benjamin to follow him, but Benjamin cannot leave Europe, finds it impossible to learn Hebrew, and does not go. But there is a long dialogue between them, and indeed this picture ends up in Scholem's hands, because when Benjamin flees from Paris in June 1940, he's heading down towards Lourdes, and then he's going to try to make an escape across the Pyrenees, which ends fatefully. He entrusts his precious work of art to Georges Bataille, who works in the library in Paris, and Bataille holds on to it. And I think at the point when Bataille hears that Benjamin has killed himself on the border of France and Spain in September 1940, he makes sure that the image goes to the third influence on Benjamin's life, who's Theodore Adorno, who's in the US by this point, in California, unhappily criticizing Hollywood culture and the culture industry and so on. But then it's discovered in the will that Benjamin actually leaves this picture to Scholem, so it makes its way to Jerusalem, where it then lives the rest of its life pretty much until this day. But we can come back to that. I just wanted to read one more thesis before perhaps we evoke some of the other angels, or maybe Tam, could you read the one at the beginning about the class struggle?
12.
Is it 12? Yeah.
We need history, but we need it differently from the spoiled lazy bones in the garden of knowledge. Nature on the use and abuse of history for life. The subject of historical cognition is the battling oppressed class itself. In Marx, it steps forward as the final enslaved and avenging class, which carries out the work of emancipation in the name of generations of downtrodden to its conclusion. This consciousness, which for a short time made itself felt in the Spartacus Splitter Group, the forerunner of the German Communist Party, was objectionable to social democracy from the very beginning. In the course of 3 decades, it succeeded in almost completely erasing the name of Blanca. Blanqui, whose distant thunder, Ernst Klein, had made the preceding century tremble. It contented itself with assigning the working class the role of the savior of future generations. It thereby severed the sinews of its greatest power. Through this schooling, the class forgot its hate as much as its spirit of sacrifice. For both nourished themselves on the picture of enslaved for them, not on the ideal of the emancipated heir.
I think what we see there is this sense of wanting to go back in history and crack it open and find these promises and these moments which were stymied or cut down or not allowed to develop. Those are all the proofs that, you know, we're not in this kind of linear, automatic and inevitable progress route, but there are things, they're almost like bombs laid in the past that we need to detonate in the present, and that's what we nourish ourselves on. So I think that's a moment maybe to turn to some bomb laid in the past from one of our other angelic figures.
Yeah. Get the other image. And, yeah, we'll go for that one. This play I mentioned,
Just one second.
a satire of the Three Estates, written by Sir David Lindsay, who was sort of cultural ambassador to James VI and James I. And he travelled around Europe, and Scotland at the time was one of the leading European nations for culture. And he wrote this play that was very Brechtian in a way, in that, I mean, it lasted, we did it, about 5.5 hours. That's a good size for the angel, though.
Sorry.
But it had a very Brechtian device in that in one of the intervals during the play, this guy jumped up on stage and started condemning what had been going on. And he was called John the Commonweal. It was as if the common man had just taken over the play and was lambasting them and explaining the predicament that he and his class were in. It was ironic that this play, as I say, had never been performed in its entirety for 500 years, and it took funding from the British state, really, ultimately, to put this on. Can't get it. No, but you can sort of, yeah, just about see it. I mean, even that little image, I appeared in this with wings on, and it was used. I was asked by Greg Walker, who led the whole project and might be listening in, that he'd edited this book, the Oxford Book of Scottish Theatre, and it came just at a time where I've never felt much more alienated from Scottish theatre, but it was an amazing thing to be representing Scottish theatre in this way with these angel wings, just at the same time as so many of these other strands were coming into play, which has been a sort of factor in so much of the stuff that I've been exploring here. So I'll just try a bit of the divine correction. He appears, you've got the picture from what has gone on previously, that the king is living in corruption. He is indulging himself sexually a lot, and things are going badly in terms of the country, and it needs a bouncer, an avenging angel, to come in and sort out all of the mess. It is in a broad Scots, despite, as I say, or possibly because I say that it was a great European work. It is written in, as you shall hear, a pretty dense Scots language, but it does begin with a Latin quote.
Beatum qui esserunt et sitiunt justitia. Blessed are they that you hunger and thirst for righteousness. Matthew 5:6. There are the words of the redoubted Rory, the Prince of Peace, above all kings king. When he's be sent all countries to convoy, and all misdoers dourly to do right. I will do naught without the convening in Parliament of the estates of. In their presence I shall, but feigning iniquity under my sword, do thrall. There may no prince do act honourable, but if his counsel thereto will assist, how may he know the thing most profitable to follow virtue and vices to resist, without he be instructed and solaced? And when the king stands at his counsel soon, then wealth shall wax and plenty, as he list, and policy
Sal in his realm abound. If only list my name for to inquire, I am called Divine Correctio. I fled through mony uncouth land and shire to the great prophet of elk nation. Now I am coming to this region to till the ground that has been long unsold, to punish tyrants for their transgression, and to cause leal men live upon the earth. Near realm nor land, but my support may stand, for I gar kings live into royal, for to rich and poor I bear an equal band, that they may live into their own degree. Where I am not, is no tranquility. By me traitors and tyrants are put down, for thinks me scheme by their iniquity till they be punished by me. Correctio. This is the real revolution. What is in kind? Naught but in officer, to cause his lieges live in equity, and under God to be and punisher the trespassers against his majesty. But when the king does live in tyranny, breaking justice for fear or affection, then in his realm, in war and poverty, with shameful slaughter, but correction. I am in judge, right potent and severe, come to do justice many thousand mile. I am sick constant, they in peace and war. Their justice for fear or affection, ne bud nor favour may my sect or sile. There is therefore right money in this isle for my repair, but doot that does repent. But virtuous men, I trust, shall on me smile, and of my coming be right well content.
That's a kind of powerful, avenging angel, or, I mean, I love the name Divine Correction, and the ways in which the characters embody these abstract forces of spirituality, temporality, and so on. And I suppose in some ways that reminds me again of Brecht, like Brecht's Seven Deadly Sins, where he has a play about trying to again think about contemporary morality and immorality, and the ways in which we negotiate these traditions of biblical morality, and maybe it goes back again to what I said about the Berta Lask play about Thomas Munzer and the peasants, and mobilizing religious justice in order to bring about heaven on earth, rather than the pie in the sky, jam tomorrow kind of stuff. So this is how we might incorporate the concern that people sometimes have about Benjamin's thesis, because it's often interpreted as messianic. I mean, it is messianic in a sense. There's a thesis where he talks about any moment will be the moment when the Messiah walks through the straight gate and is the redeemer of generations. But I think that's, we do mobilize these theological frames. We can't shake them off. You know, they're embedded in our worldviews, but it doesn't. You can be theological without being a believer, in a sense, I suppose. And people have equally said of Marx that it follows a sort of mode of religious patterning in terms of, you know, the fall and then the lifting up into the promised land or the realm of freedom and so on, which was a kind of Garden of Eden. Speaking of religious or people interested in the mystical, would you like to contribute another angel from Blake to the discussion?
William Blake's a great hero of mine. Discovered him because his grave was close to where I lived in Shoreditch, in Bunhill Fields. Blake had this, when he was 9 years old, he said he saw angels in a tree. And he said that this little bit here is saying, although his parents tried to discourage him from lying, they did observe that he was different from his peers and did not force him to attend the conventional school. Instead, he learned to read and write at home. And at points I've gone, well, who the fuck am I to say that William Blake didn't see fucking angels in the tree? It's what he thrived on in many ways. And this is a poem of his called The Angel, and it's put together with another revolutionary romantic with the words of Davy Henderson in a song from the eponymous album, St. Jack.
A 23. What kind of name? And the eye is amazing. Guarded by an angel light, which was moved the environment. Across the sea. I walked across the sea. What did you see? Tragedy. It was how do you? Maybe the one that's sleep. But there's two else. Don't sleep. It's a kind of eye your eyes. I get this voice from dry. And I went both night and day. And he wiped my tears away. And I went both day and night. And hate from heaven. My heart's still rising. Oh, it's been so big. And I hate me old stuff. Yeah, make me all bad. Just seem bad. I can see him now. Just like a burned cup. And his feathers and top. So he took his wings and fled. Then the morning blushed rosy red. I dried my tears and armed my fears to 10,000 shields and spears. I can see him now. Just like a burnout car. Spread his wings on the bar. And his feathers and tar. Soon my angel came again. I was armed. He came in vain. For the time of youth was fled. And gray hair were on my head. When I heard this song, after they happened with divine correction, or what was divine correction you like to give with years in feathers and tar?
If you could see, if you could see the Blake in Songs of Experience, I think it's in. And it's that beautiful combination of words, you know, etched in a particular way that Blake operated, and then the image of the angel and the forlorn person lying on the ground. And there's something there again about that idea in Benjamin of words merging into image and graphic line, and producing a kind of another space for art and expression. And I suppose, and also I thought was very funny and interesting that Tam was mashing up these different epochs. And as we're coming towards the end-ish, I assume, I wanted to talk about briefly about another mashup of different times, occasioned by something that Zoe Beloff wrote. So I talked about the Angelus Novus image ending up in Jerusalem, where it's kept under lock and key most of the time, but as at least one person here in this room knows, it occasionally goes out on journeys to be shown under very pious circumstances. And it came to Berlin this summer to be part of an exhibition about angels, ruination, Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire, and all those church angels and so on. And I wanted to read something Zoe Beloff wrote that just appeared on social media just for her friends a couple of days ago, and probably horrified to know I was reading it, but it encapsulates so much. But I want to say a word about Zoe Beloff first, who's a Scottish artist who actually knew.
I knew back then, and she moved to New York in about 1980.
Yeah, and I got to know her subsequently because she does lots of her work around Benjamin and Brecht, Eisenstein, and she's recreated, or she's made films like in portrait mode that Eisenstein wanted to do, and she's done lots of work around sort of workers post-COVID in the public libraries in New York. She had these workers in trade union buildings and so on. She's always working in this very interesting way. She made this lovely film about Brecht in Hollywood, which is sort of very funny, recreating the frustrations that Brecht experienced there. But in terms of mashups, one of the things she did was immediately after Occupy Wall Street had ended, the camps had been broken up in New York, she staged a play by Brecht from the 40s called Days of the Commune. And this is Brecht's play in the 40s looking back at the Paris Commune. And she transposed that play into the streets of New York and acted out the scenes over a few weekends in different places where the Occupy movement had been. And many of the participants were people who'd been involved in Occupy. And she staged it in a Brechtian way with lots of placards and all of the sort of alienation effect paraphernalia that Brecht introduced and produced within it these sort of discussions about tactics and strategy and what had gone on and how might one compare the bloody repression, the Paris Commune, to the aftermath of Occupy Wall Street and so on. So the play took on another dimension. I mention that just for context and to tie it back to Brecht, but what I want to read is this shortish thing that she wrote about seeing the Angelus Novus watercolor in Berlin. And she wrote this to a friend but decided to make it public. The last time I saw the Angelus Novus was some years ago in Paris. I remember you and I were struck by how cheerful he looked with his jazz hands, little jagged teeth and gap-toothed grin. I was able to glimpse the angel again this summer at the Boulder Museum in Berlin. The setting was somber. The weight of German history hung heavy. I had to wait for some time before I was let into a small room, dimly lit, to view the exhibition titled The Angels of Berlin. The Angelus Novus I remembered had changed. I now know where he had been in the intervening years, imprisoned in an Israeli museum in Jerusalem. How did this come to be? It turns out that when Walter Benjamin fled from Paris, he gave the little angel to Georges Bataille for safekeeping. Bataille hid it in the French National Library. After the war, he sent it to Theodore Adorno. But when Benjamin's will was read, it was discovered that he had actually bequeathed Angelus Novus to Gershom Scholem. So the angel was sent to Israel, and then when Scholem died, he was sequestered in a museum, locked in a room without light. When I read this, I literally wept. How could it be that he was trapped in total darkness like a Palestinian prisoner? Then it dawned on me, but of course, where else would he be in the 21st century? He must be here in Jerusalem, so he can gaze upon the terrible destruction, the wreckage piled on wreckage that is Gaza. One can call it fate that brought him to Jerusalem, but it's not fate, just another name for a higher order of things. I imagine the Israelis assume that by keeping him locked up in darkness, he will not know the hell they wreak on earth. But they do not understand that he does not experience the world as we do. And so when Angelus Novus and I met in Berlin, I saw in him what I could not see before. His image has a strange kind of fragile flatness, like an onion skin origami or a kite folded in on itself. It occurred to me perhaps he's not a drawing at all, but some kind of diagram, or perhaps a trace or imprint, a two-dimensional representation of a multi-dimensional being. I'm thinking of how, although we can only exist in three-dimensional space, some physicists posit that the universe may contain many more dimensions. These extra dimensions are thought to be curled up and very small, making them undetectable at our scale. Just look at the angel's hair. They are tiny scrolls. These scrolls are just perhaps a trace of the hidden dimensions that are waiting to unfurl. If we were to be able to comprehend the cosmos as it truly is, we might understand how the angel is not just an image on paper, but a being in all its many dimensions, a cloud of vibrations in the universe that does not see with earthly eyes, that is not trapped by lock and key. Likewise, his experience of time is quite different from ours. It is not separate from space. Angelus Novus exists in a state of superimposed simultaneity. Walter Benjamin must have had a sense of this when he wrote that, quote, where a chain of events appears before us, he sees one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it at his feet. Quote, quote. Eons pass, but he is always there, at the epicenter of the storm, wherever that may be. As Benjamin writes so poignantly, the angel would like to stay, awaken the dead and make whole what has been smashed. This he cannot do, but know that he will always be there to bear witness. And I think what I like about that is that it can see into the image some of the things that Benjamin is taking maybe out of it about history, about its multiplicity, multidimensionality, the fact that things are not inevitable, that other things could have happened but were blocked, and yet we can still evoke those energies from the past and sort of militate in relation to those things. in the future, but and it also expresses something of that, the kind of recurrence of the image for Benjamin, but also afterwards, of course, you know, appearing in Germany in this moment is a politically controversial thing, given the way in which, you know, German politics has, with its anti-Semitism, has become so punishing and gruesome, and so, you know, the angel enters into another constellation of German history that is difficult and ugly, and so comes also, I think, to bear witness to a certain kind of wreckage that's unfolding in Germany as well. But yeah, did you want to say anything
That's
more, or shall we just
Yeah.
open things up?